it's time that we talked about, well, talking. Specifically, conversations in video games. Whether it's chatting to your pal Edie in Fallout New Vegas, or engaging in philosophical debate in something like Subsurface Circular, we spend an awful lot of our time in video games locked in one form of conversation or another. Thing is, most video games are actually kinda bad at dialogue. We're getting better at writing lore, interesting characters, and narrative twists and turns, but when it comes to actually having a chat, we're kind of in the dark ages still. That's because the essentials of how to write a story are techniques that have been practiced for centuries, but interactive media is something new, and working that interactivity into our art is a whole new challenge for us to tackle. Recently, I've been going through Mass Effect 2, and my biggest takeaway is how stilted and artificial the dialogue system is in this game. Conversations don't flow naturally, they feel like two robots just doing call and response. There's very little sense of flow when there is, you're constantly hampered by overly simplistic moral choices. I'll qualify all of this by saying that I actually really like the game and the whole franchise. The characters are great, it manages to make cover shooter combat at least somewhat interesting, and I love the Mass Effect universe. However, I think a lot of my issues with these games comes down to how Mass Effect utilises our old friend, the branching path dialogue system. The way branching paths work is quite simple. You've got several conversational nodes laid out, and you can advance between them at your leisure. Each node usually represents a given topic that you can further explore or build upon. Sometimes branches on the path are exclusive from one another, and there may be points where you can't go back and revisit earlier parts of the conversation. In Mass Effect, you've got this little radial menu which gives you a maximum of 6 possible options to choose from. When you cut out the option to end the conversation, that brings things down to 5. Just out of curiosity, when Miranda says,
"Miranda, but you were..."
Dead?
how many potential responses can you think of? 10? 100? More? Quite likely. Dialogue is incredibly complex, with slight alterations in word choice or pitch drastically changing the meaning of a sentence. In Mass Effect though, this gets boiled down to 5 simple options, which most of the time can be summed up in the little blurb you get on the dialogue wheel. The problems don't end there, because each of the 6 bits on the radial menu are assigned an arbitrary function. You've got exit, information requests, follow-up questions, the goodie response, the neutral response, and the baddie response. This is fine in theory. Having parts of the menu be assigned different functions is great UI design, but it leads to BioWare using this template as law rather than a guideline. When I meet up with my good friend Tali after literally dying, there's no option to go, "Oh my god, Tali, I missed you, oh it's good to see you." The game instead forces you to say something to the effect of, "Hello, yes, I am Commander Shepard, here is proof. Also I'm with the baddies now." It felt weirdly impersonal and totally out of character for the nice Shepard I was trying to play, but there was no other option. This is made worse with the addition of Paragon and Renegade points, henceforth referred to as goodie points and baddie points. See, the Mass Effect system locks you out of saying things depending on your level of goodie points or baddie points. It's bizarre. Commander Shepard only acquires the requisite critical thinking and debate abilities required to intimidate people after doing a bit of this.
I say to you, if you shoot me, my team.
Oh, side note, I know a lot of people say Renegade and Paragon points are really about your reputation, how much people fear or respect you, and personally I disagree. Why would the Rachni Queen, a giant death cockroach, care about your reputation? But even if that were the case, I think the ability to try and pull off Paragon emotional appeals or Renegade threats and fail because you're not cool enough, rather than being locked out entirely, would be much better at getting this across if it were the case. Now, the branching path system isn't bad, but it's designed to be a compromise between interactivity and time. See, with the almost limitless scope of word order, inflection and subtext, accurately simulating conversation, let alone within a game, is impossible given current technology, which means that developers have to stealthily, or not so stealthily, circumvent this limitation if they want to have interactive talky bits in their game. One of the easiest ways to do this is with branching path dialogue trees. They give players the feeling of freedom that real-life discourse offers them, while limiting them to a set of pre-planned options. BioWare took a system that's intended to give you freedom within limits, and instead removed that freedom. Mass Effect advertises itself as having a relatively linear story you can manipulate via your choices, but that's not really true. Owing to how the game is set up, you only really have one choice, Renegade or Paragon. that you pick early on and then stick with. Trying anything else is deliberate self-sabotage because the best conversation choices are always goody point or baddie point locked options and leads to characters dying or you not getting to dry hump best boy Garrus. Okay, so enough complaining about Mass Effect. What I'm looking for in this video is a way to fix the problem inherent to Mass Effect's dialogue system. Let's check out some other games and see how they handle dialogue systems to see what BioWare can learn from them. The most basic dialogue systems are what I'd call linear systems. They're distinct in of the fact that they're not interactive. A conversation is initiated and then plays out in a predictable way from start to finish before dumping you back into the game. This sort of stuff is pretty ubiquitous in gaming's early history and still sees use today in some cinematic games as well as stuff like visual novels. A few years ago, these linear dialogue bits were a real public villain. People criticised these segments as being uninteractive, unduly forced and full of lame expository information dumps. Call of Duty was a big target for this sort of critique and, with good reason, the writing in those games for the most part sucks. But that's my point. Linear dialogue systems aren't bad, they just facilitate lazy writing. When you don't have to worry about your player losing interest or missing crucial plot elements, you don't have to bother writing engaging effective dialogue or making the characters memorable because people are going to be forced to encounter them either way. Look at a game like Wolfenstein The New Order. Structurally, it's pretty much identical to something like Call of Duty, a chronological series of missions broken up by dialogue segments that you've got no real agency in. But where it differs is in having this brilliantly realised world, filled with memorable characters. Seriously, this footage is from months ago and I could tell you all about Anya, Frau Engel, Set. The hell, even BJ himself has some great texture beyond grizzled FPS protagonist. There's this whole subcurrent of him being simultaneously the fascist Übermensch and Das Untermensch, representing the hypocrisy of that particular ideology. But that's not the topic of this video. My time with Wolfenstein was really fun, and the cutscenes and drawn out non-action bits rank among my favourite parts of the game, precisely because of the writing talent that went into it. A lot of people say that games, being an interactive medium, need to always be as interactive as possible. But if you ask me, this philosophy stands in the way of good storytelling. When you have to write 5 possible storylines to represent total player freedom, each one gets 20% of the effort of a regular linear storyline. As antithetical to gaming as it sounds, often our best narratives come from the least interactive places. Just look at the simple well-roundedness of Bioshock, or the character-driven masterpiece that is Her Story, or Telltale's undisputed opus, Tales from the Borderlands. It's the best one. Mass Effect knows this well. It's why you can never really affect the core story of Stop the Reapers beyond some cosmetic alterations, and why all the big narrative game changers like the utterly fantastic Suicide Mission come at the end of their respective games, though they never seem to end up mattering, with any dead character getting replaced with a near identical clone in the next game. The issue is that BioWare love to entertain the idea of player choice and self-expression, but I'd argue the ability to choose what kind of Shepard you are does nothing but dilute the quality of writing I actually really enjoy. Mass Effect 2's best writing is obviously in the form of its very well fleshed out characters, all of whom have a highly choreographed arc, either romantic or platonic. Your choices are pretty much only to determine which of these arcs you're on, or if the arc happens at all. Garrus will always be doing his calibrations until it's time for you to win his loyalty in a gritty buddy cop mission regardless of what kind of Shepard you are. It's when Mass Effect opens up and tries to get you to have a more open-ended experience that the curtain is drawn away, and we see that the idea of narrative choice in Mass Effect is more of an aesthetic than it is actually reflected in the game mechanics. I think Deus Ex Human Revolution, for all its faults, handles this much better. Check out this conversation with my boss. He has established motives and character traits, and I've got a clear goal in mind. Find out why he had a security breach installed into his own network. By removing the goody baddie point system, my choice of dialogue option isn't some metagamey choice about what kind of playthrough I'm doing, but an in-universe decision to appeal to this character's personality. It also helps that Adam Jensen is a much more concrete character than Shepard. With the potential for Shepard to be both a virtuous, kind person, or a total dick with a mostly unchanged script, Mass Effect has to keep things vague and bland. But by keeping Jensen's personality tight and focused, regardless of if you're playing lethally or as a pacifist.
I'm not gonna lie and say they didn't come in handy back there. But like you said, I didn't choose to get augmented.
That being a no-nonsense grump, the writers can afford to give the individual dialogue options much more texture, because they'll always make sense coming from Jensen. It's also really nice that my choices have a less binary right or wrong outcome. Sure, I eventually got my info from Sarif, but I pissed off a man who's slowly looking less and less like he's acting in my interest.
I don't want this to come between us. I'll send the files to your computer. You can see for yourself what he dug up. But Adam, you'd better be sure.
In Mass Effect, it's hard to justify a lot of the Renegade choices, especially when they're almost arbitrarily cruel, whereas the Paragon choices are almost saccharine in their wholesome niceness. Mass Effect does have some awesome unintentional moral ambiguity though, namely in Legion's loyalty mission, where you've got to decide between essentially brainwashing an entire culture, which is supposed to be the goody points option, or killing them. I chose the latter despite being a Paragon Shepherd. Another example of a great branching path dialogue system is Fallout New Vegas. In classic Obsidian style, the world, characters and quests are so detailed, so intricate, that they ran out of development time and had to cut a bunch of content. What is there though is absolutely fantastic. Let's take a look at one of the best quests in the game in my opinion, Ghost Town Gunfight, a quest designed to round out the tutorial zone of Goodsprings. The quest starts out with this guy, Ringo, hiding out from a group called the Powder Gangers. In any other game, fixing his problem will be a simple case of finding the local bandit hideout and blowing them up. Not so in New Vegas. First of all, you've got to round up the local townsfolk by passing skill checks or otherwise convincing them, followed by an old-fashioned shootout with the Powder Gangers once they arrive. Just like the rest of the game, anyone who dies in this fight is gone for good. Alternatively, you can say sod all that and side with the Powder Gangers to butcher most of your new friends in Goodsprings. Whilst this early quest is pretty straightforward, it utilises New Vegas' dialogue system excellently, showing you that your choice of skills will not only affect what options you'll have available to you, but also that in New Vegas, who you talk to and what you say has real consequences. If you save Ringo, he helps you out when you get to Vegas, and being too chummy with the Powder Gangers can fail Ghost Town Gunfight outright.
I saw you being awfully friendly with Joe Cobb, so no thanks.
As great as New Vegas is, I don't think its skill point based reactive system would work. Mass Effect is much more linear. So, what about Subsurface Circular? It uses the same branching path dialogue system, but uses it to tell a wholly linear story. In Subsurface, you play a robot detective, talking to other robots in order to make your deductions. Talking to the other robots grants you focus points, which is kind of like an inventory of conversation topics that could be applied to any other character to talk about it. It really speeds up information gathering, because you can use it to quickly cut to the chase and get the info you need before moving on. I think Mass Effect could really benefit from a system like this. Imagine how much smoother conversation would be if you had a dedicated "What do you know about the Reapers" button, freeing up the rest of the dialogue wheel for more meaningful avenues of conversation. At least, it would be, were it not for the elephant in the room, production values. Trimming down your script, doing away with arbitrary morality systems, and adding conversational shorthands will only go so far to fixing the reason why so many dialogue systems are hamstrung. AAA video games are so expensive to make nowadays, and huge budgets are sunk into making them look as shiny as possible. To add a single new line of dialogue means animating characters, recording voiceovers, doing even more audiovisual editing on top of the costs of actually implementing that stuff into the game. Adding a voiced protagonist into Fallout 4 was a large contributing factor in the unspeakable defilement of its dialogue system, just because it costs so much money to record all the different options. Back in the day, or in smaller indie games, they can afford to have much more dialogue variety because they don't voice stuff or use expensive photorealistic graphics. There's also another interesting avenue of possibility, that of procedurally generated dialogue systems that respond on the fly to input, like Kaizen from Event Zero. If you don't know, Event Zero's main mechanic is an AI chatbot called Kaizen, who's pretty central to the story. You can chat to him using these terminals just like you would Siri or Cleverbot. Kaizen is actually pretty good at responding to your requests if you phrase them right, and even remembers how you spoke to him in the past. However, as much as advocates for this kind of technology might preach the opposite, procedural dialogue has a long way to go before it can pass for human. Kaizen is great at providing, or more often withholding information, but it lacks the nuance that makes conversation actually work. Kaizen has no real emotion to speak of, no easily discernible motives, or the ability to remember previous contexts. This is fine within the conceit of a buggy experimental AI, but procedural dialogue is far from replacing real writers. Going into this video, I was hoping to in some way fix Mass Effect's dialogue problem, as you can see from the title of this video, but my research has proven that there's really no easy answer. There's no way to have everything we want out of a dialogue system without it being completely unfeasible to actually implement. What I can say though, is that games who do dialogue well specialise, whether that's in having a focused linear story, really fleshing out branching paths, or reinventing a cool new way of thinking about dialogue. If you try and do a bit of everything, then try and package it all in an expensive box, you'll end up with a half-baked end result and a badly written mixed metaphor. Getting dialogue right is hard. It's not something we totally understand in the real world, let alone in media. But, so long as we keep honing our skills and our dialogue systems in games, one day I have hope that someone can create a dialogue system that will let me actually tolerate Cade Nalenko. I believe. Hey folks, I'm back. Hope you enjoyed the video. This one is slightly late for reasons I outlined in the XCOM video. By the way, 3,000 views? What the hell, right? I'll apologise again for my spoilerisation of Hellblade. I know that quite rightfully upset some people, but I'm glad that most people like the video in spite of that. Hey, new people, hope you stick around. I've got no real announcements or anything, so I'll just make this outro brief. You all have a nice day, and reality is a lie. Buy gold! Bye!